بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله تعالى على سيدنا محمد عبده ورسوله النبي الأمين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. نوينا العلم والتعليم والتذكر والتذكير ونفع الانتفاع والإقبال والاستفادة والحث على اليسر من كتاب الله وسنة رسوله صلى الله عليه وآله وصحبه وسلم من دعاء إلى خير الدلالة على الهدى ابتغاء الله سبحانه وتعالى وطلبه بقربه سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا من علما وهب لنا حكما والحقنا بالصالحين وعلمنا التأويل رحمة الدين واهدنا سواء السبيل برحمتك يا ارحم الراحمين. سبحانك لا نحصي ثناء عليك انت كما فيك فلك الحمد حتى ترضى الحمد لله العظيم ولك الحمد بعد رضا. اللهم صل وسلم على سيدنا محمد في الاولين وصل وسلم على سيدنا محمد في الاخرين وصل وسلم على سيدنا محمد إلى أعلى النبيين وصل وسلم على سيدنا محمد حتى ترث الأرض ومن عليها وأنت خير الوارثين وصل وسلم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Alhamdulillah, we praise and thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and acknowledge His favors upon us by allowing us together for His sake, and the gatherings in which people come together for the sake of rectifying and correcting their hearts' relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then these are the most favored gatherings on the face of the earth, and this is the inheritance of Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who said, I have not been sent except to perfect good moral character. And how does a person perfect their character? Is to learn about the diseases of the heart and how to purify oneself of it, to learn about the virtues of the heart and how to attain and imbibe oneself with it. And so we are involved in, we can use the term, we are involved in history, because the preservation of the deen is not preserved through governments, and the preservation of the deen is not preserved through institutions, right, or academia. The preservation of the deen is done through those who take spiritual states from those before them, who took it from those before them, who took it from those before them, going all the way back to Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. بل هو آيات بينات في صدور الذين أوتوا العلم. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when He describes the Quran, which is in essence the deen, and this way, He says it is clear signs. بل هو آيات بينات. Where are these signs? Are they in books? Are they in academia? Are they in conferences? Are they on posts? Right? Are they in lengthy discussions, political analysis? بل هو آيات بينات في صدور الذين أوتوا العلم. These are clear signs that we have placed in the chests or in the hearts of those who have been given knowledge. And so first and foremost, knowledge is light. Meaning when a person starts learning the correct knowledge, automatically they feel an expansiveness in their hearts and expansiveness in their chest, meaning light is now beginning to enter. And any knowledge that a person studies and learns about, and they do not feel light, then either the intention for learning, and this could be worldly knowledge, but if the intention is not, it's not aligned with the message of the Prophet ﷺ, then that light is cut off. And likewise, it will be those who come afterwards that inherit these states from those who came before them, who will preserve the inheritance, which will then finally culminate in prophecy. It started with prophecy and it will end in prophecy with the coming of Isa alayhi salam, and before him at the time of the And we know the ahadith that speak about the end of times, the army of Imam Mahdi will be an army of weapons. And obviously will have weapons. But when the Prophet ﷺ describes the army of Imam al-Mahdi, and every person should have an intention to be in the army of Imam Mahdi, whether we live to see the time or not. And on the other hand, we do not busy ourselves with worrying about who is Imam Mahdi and is the time right and what is happening around. No, the person has to be living their life so that if he appears, we are already on what we're supposed to do. And if he doesn't appear, one gets the reward for it being that intention. Many people have this idea that, okay, when the end of times arrive, when Imam Mahdi appears, then I'm going to start doing something, I'm going to go. The armies, if you want to call them the spiritual armies, are already in place and are already prepared. Those are the armies of the hearts. The Prophet also, when he spoke about the army of Imam al-Mahdi, he said they would conquer the castles of Rome. How? With their takbir. They would say Allahu Akbar, and the right side of fortress would fall down. They would say Allahu Akbar a second time, and the third. the left side of the fortress. They will have a spiritual power. We also know the hadith at the end of times, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions about the great battles that will take place in Jerusalem. And that the trees will speak to the believers. And the tree will say, "Oh believer, there is an enemy of Allah behind me, come and kill him." What does that mean? Can human beings understand the language of trees? Can we speak to trees? If we can't understand what trees are saying, then we're not fit to be in the army of Imam al-Mahdi, because the army of Imam al-Mahdi will have a spiritual power. And so the prep for those times is what is to work on the heart first and foremost. And weapons have absolutely no regard when it comes to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They will say, إِذَا ضُيِّعَتْ تَقْوَى فَالنَّصْرُ لِلْأَقْوَى. If taqwa is lost, then only victory lies for those who are more powerful with regards to material means. Right? Otherwise, we know the story of Musa. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran constantly with Musa of Ibrahim alayhi salam against Namrud. And Musa alayhi salam against, how was Ibrahim alayhi salam saved? Through normal means or through miraculous means? Miraculous means. He was thrown into the fire which didn't affect him. How was Musa alayhi salam saved? Through normal means or miraculous means? Miraculous means. Sulaiman alayhi salam, when he moved the throne of Bilqis from Yemen to Jerusalem, was that normal or miraculous? What is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala teaching us is that He will do the miraculous for us if we do our part. And so victory is not away from this ummah because of anything else other than our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and to the effect that the miraculous, what we call miracles, has to become the norm. Because who is the one that enacts those miracles? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And what does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala not have power over? So if one of us, or if someone raises their finger and says, Allahu Akbar, are they able to destroy an army? You rely on yourself, obviously, most definitely not. But do you believe Allah has power to destroy an army at the takbir of one person? We say that with our minds, but do we really believe it with our hearts? And more than that, do we have the hearts that we know that when we say that this will actually happen? Right? He's a Christian priest who accepted Islam. He came to Tarim. He was a pastor, actually. Pastor is the Protestant, the priest on the Catholic. And it's nice to learn from new Muslims how they came to Islam. But he was brought up in a spiritual line of the Christianity that they practice, which is to some extent the remnants of maybe the Tasawwuf Christian, maybe to also have a strength spiritual activity. He would say on his own that he was inspired to stand awake at night at 3 o'clock in the morning because he found his pastor always awake at 3 o'clock in the morning on his knees. Right? And they are in respond with this faith. So he was a Christian. And he mentions, and this was even recorded in newspapers and stuff like that, where he would cure people with broken arms just by praying over them. Right? So he'd go into hospitals and he'd go to public areas and he'd start praying over people. Obviously, in his understanding of who God is, praying the name of Jesus. But what is unique? People started to get cured. But that's not, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allows miracles to happen in the hands of believers and disbelievers. That's not a big thing. Many, Dajjal himself will have the biggest miracles, right? But what is unique is when I spoke to him, and so I asked him, I said, so how did you get to the point of reading over people? Did you not fear that this is not going to happen? And look at how Allah creates faith in people's hearts. He said, I knew I had to fail for 40 times before I would succeed. And I knew I would have to make a fool of myself before God would help me. Right? And so he went and he goes with this fervor, and he goes and he prays and he reads over people. Right? And then obviously when he came to Islam, he asked Shaykh about why is it that even though he was praying to the Lord in Christianity, that this was happened. And he says that Allah, and the Shaykh spoke, gave a very beautiful reply that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, out of his compassion, he has a general mercy for the entire creation. And so anyone that calls upon him, even if their conception of him might be incorrect, he has a general mercy for creation. And that general mercy of creation means Allah gives every single human being air to breathe, and gives them food to eat, even though they disbelieve in even the greatest of tyrants, right? And those who disbelieve in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and those who are oppressing, they still breathe. Whose air is it? It's Allah's air. And Allah allows the water to go down their throats and they don't choke with it. And so Allah has a general mercy. And so when people call upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? And stories are told here by our Shaykh in these parts about someone that he worshipped an idol. And the idol's name, or the idol was Sanam. Sanam in Arabic means Sanam. So he started to call on Sanam and saying that he mispronounced it, and he started saying Ya Samad, which is one of the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then answered his call, and the Prophet of that time, or whoever was narrating the story, says that then in their conversation, I would read, they asked Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, why did you reply? And he says, out of mercy, he called on me by the name, even though he didn't have the right conception, but he called on me. And the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we cannot even fathom. And the reason why we're saying that is because if Allah has this mercy for people who place their complete trust in Him, even though their conception of Him is incorrect, then what about the believers? Right? And then the Shaykh said, Allah has a special mercy for the believers. And so the only problem with the Ummah is believers have not poured their hearts out to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We've not given our hearts to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We've given our hearts to everything else, to name, to fame, to status, to relationships, right? To wealth, to everything else. Have we given our heart to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? And that's the only thing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants. Allah does not want our forms, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants our heart. And our intention in coming to these lessons is to learn how to give our hearts to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We reached page 27 in the book, Secrets of Those Drawn Near, where the author mentions that gains are proportionate to the risks taken. Right? And the path to Allah is the most precious path and would require the greatest of sacrifices. The greater the sacrifice, the greater will be the reward from the side of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And one has to be sincere. The worst thing that can happen to a person is to take the relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala lightly. Right? In that we start doing something, but we break our resolve. So for example, a person might think, oh, you know what, I want to fast. The wife is past us now, and I should fast. Now when they fasting, they change their mind and they say, okay, no, maybe I'll break my fast today, I'll fast tomorrow. The worst thing is that the nafs gets used to a person breaking the resolve. We have to take our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala seriously, meaning keep our appointments with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We don't break our appointments with people, right? We don't make our our day-to-day life. We have a meeting, right? We make sure we attend the meeting. And we keep to our word. And what sincerity means learning to keep our appointments with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the greatest test of that, or the greatest manifestation of that, is how do we perform our salah, just with regards to the timing of salah, irrespective of how we perform it, and whether it's with presence of heart and mind. But do we maintain that schedule of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? And salah is fard, so everyone does it. I know it is hoped that everyone does it, but the path to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala means that one has to do more than others are doing. So if we ought to be doing dhikr on a daily basis, are we regular with it? Do we only do dhikr when we're in a group, right? Or when we're at home on our alone, or just alone with our families or children? Then we don't do it, right? And we will all fall into these lapses. But taking our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala seriously means that what we do in private is more than what we do in public. And to say that this is now, so if we start something, we don't end it. The Prophet also, when he's described as his actions, كَانَ عَمَلُهُ دِيمًا. His actions were constant. And it's better for someone to sit and just read La ilaha illallah 12 times in one day, than to do La ilaha illallah 1,000 times today, and then tomorrow you don't do it. And then maybe a week goes by and you read 1,000,000 La ilaha illallah, and then, but constantly every single day. And the trick of shaitan when someone wants to approach Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is to inspire you with abundance. He wants you to do a lot. So a person who's never read Quran, now he's holding the Quran in his hand because he thinks, okay, tonight I'm going to correct my relationship with the Quran. And so on. So he opens up and he was planning to read, right, maybe for 10 minutes. But now he finds so much himma, he says, you know what, I think tonight I can do a khatam, right? And now he starts worrying about the quantity. And he might be able to read, he'll read maybe for 2-3 hours. He'll go for today, tomorrow. But it has not been his habit. So what's going to happen? After a week, he'll be worn out. Then he stops stops really altogether. And so in the means of approach to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, one also plans how they are going to do the ibadah. I might have himmah to do a lot, but I know that I have to do some things I have to maintain with my schedule. Today I'm free, but I know tomorrow or next week this time I'll have guests at this particular time. If that's the time I've chosen for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then I've got to maintain the timing as well. I need to be able to do things constantly. The Sahaba and the people of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would plan the ibadah in their young days, right, in such a way that they knew that when I get old, I wouldn't have the strength to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it is recorded of Sayyidina Ahmad bin Hanbal, radiallahu ta'ala anhu, that he would read in his early years 400 rak'ats of nafil salah every day. Right? He was older, he would tell his students, I've become old now, I can no longer do 400, I do only 200 now. So they would play. Right? Even Sayyidina Abdullah bin Amr bin al-As, when the Prophet encouraged him to fast just 3 days a month. And he wanted to do a lot. And he told the Prophet, no, I can do more. He wanted to fast every day. The Prophet said, no, do fast just Mondays and Thursdays. So fast so many days a month. And he wanted to do more. So the Prophet told him, okay, fast the fast of Dawood alayhi salam. Right? Or fast one day, do not fast. And do not fast the other day. When he became older, he regretted and he said, I wish I had taken the advice of the Prophet because now my body is weak. So in our approach to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we plan also for, we plan for the future also. And one doesn't know, may Allah protect us all from calamities. And one has to keep one's health, one's eyesight, one's hearing. It can be there one day, Allah can take it away. The next day, we ask Allah to protect all of our faculties. So gains are proportionate to the risks taken. Whoever risks something precious acquires something precious in return. Right? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is generous. So whoever gives up something, Allah will. Those who treat their transactions with Allah lightly and neglect to prepare properly to draw close to Allah are like those presenting offerings to a king. They will regret it when their offering is presented before the sovereign, and their efforts will end in failure. And I think we did read this last week. And the pious would say that the state of the ummah is the result of the curse of salah upon individuals of the ummah. Prophet ﷺ said, when a person performs salah, by analogy, we can imagine all the types of ibadah that we do, that salah is raised upon over a person's head, right? And the angels, if they find that salah is accepting, they would then take that salah and present it to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the salah itself makes dua, may Allah preserve you as you preserve me. But if the salah was not in accordance with acceptance and support of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, either because of a person not knowing even the rulings of salah in terms of physical tahara, purity, what breaks the person's salah, etc., or not having presence of heart and mind, then the salah curses the person and says, may Allah waste you as you has wasted me. And the angels then take that salah and throw it back into the face of the person who didn't perform salah, but he stood and he just did some movements. And the Mashayikh would say that the angels sometimes are even confused with people's ibadah. Confused meaning they can't record that the person didn't read salah, but nor can they record that the person read salah because it's not according to what is accepted, right? And so some of the Mashayikh also, when they would read salah, after they read salah, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, they would cover their faces. And they were asked why, they would say, I fear that the salah will come back into my face. And their fear for the acceptance of salah was greater than the salah that they would perform. And Imam Ghazali says, gives us the measure, the yardstick of measure. How do we know our salah was accepted? How do we know our tawbah was accepted? How do we know any ibadah that we did was accepted? Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Was our salah accepted or not? Do you think that salah is accepted in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? And the reply that you give, that is the reality. Right? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, I am as my servant thinks of me. And we can't lie to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So if I think to myself, do I really think Allah accepted this salah? If the answer is yes, alhamdulillah. And you cannot lie to yourself. Right? Even the salah that we read, do we think Allah accepted it? The person has to think to what extent, to what percentage do I think Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accepted it? And if we are really truly serious and our reply is no, what does it mean? It means we have to repeat our salah. One of the blessings of Jama'ah is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accepts the salah of the Jama'ah even though everyone was negligent for the mere fact of them keeping up the shi'ar of Islam. In fact, it is mentioned that when a jama'ah takes place and Allah accepts the gathering for everyone on the heart of the most present of the heart of the most pious person. Right? And if there is no one there whose salah is worthy, then Allah accepts the gathering. Right? And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves when people come together for His sake. The opening goes on to say, awaken to your true self, dear brother or sister or reader, and aspire to what is lofty, meaning have high spiritual aspirations. Steer clear of the path of the incapable who make empty claims. Empty claims meaning people who speak. They talk the talk, but they don't walk the walk. Right? And there are two things. One is people who make claims to have dunya, who make claims to have wealth, who make claims to have things of this dunya, right? And they don't take their relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala seriously. But then also people who do take, and this is another trap of shaitan, is when people do start coming onto the approach to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And now there's a community or there's a culture of people now coming to Allah, right? Then even within this group, you will find people who talk, but they don't actually do. And it is better for a person to remain hidden, not to be known, but they're doing their basics, than to want to do ibadah for the sake of being, or want to be, a person wants to gain sincerity for the sake of being said that he is sincere. Right? And that is the contradiction. How can a person gain sincerity, want to gain sincerity for the sake of being called sincere? He wants to gain a state with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for the sake of being said that he has a state with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the people of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would be wary of this. And somebody would prefer any dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to be taken away and to pass away rather than to fall into this particular type of sin. Also, dear brother or sister or reader, stay away from the reprehensible behaviors practiced by those with flaws and deficiencies who indulge in showy and shameful acts like dancing and cleverness. We spoke about this last week in certain types of adhkars which people do, but also anything which takes away from a person's dignity. Right? So Islam recognizes what we call al-urf. And this is important also for us to realize. Right? We have something in the fiqh called urf, which is customs. Meaning Islam recognizes the customs of different places, cultures, and times. Islam has the Sharia, which is the textual evidence of what is halal and haram. If something is not haram in a particular place, but for example, the people of this town don't do a certain thing, or they practice a certain way, then the Sharia will give sanction to these practices. Right? And they can even be fatwa given to say this is permissible or not permissible to do because of the urf or the culture of that particular place. Right? And so it's important also to be aware of the culture. So when we travel, when we go, or even when people visit, we don't push our way and our view as the only way. We have to always keep in mind that there is a variety of ways in which people practice the worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And in this regard, they would say that the paths to Allah are as many as the breaths of human beings. So for example, we did a dhikr in unison where we raise our voices. There are some ulama and there are groups of people who say this is not permissible. And they have their proofs. And we respect that opinion as well. But likewise, we would request that they respect the opinion of the mainstream, majority, large number of ulama who allow it. Where does the problem arise? The problem arises because I've been taught this in this particular way. When I see something being done other than the way I've been taught, and I regard it as being wrong. That's a wrong in the first place. But what's worse than that is then to judge a person and say that this person is misguided or they are off the path. And so these behaviors that tarnish one's integrity, strip away modesty, and erase dignity should be stayed away from. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala states in the Quran, وَعِبَادُ الرَّحْمَنِ الَّذِينَ يَمْشُونَ عَلَى الْأَرْضِ هَوْنًا. The servants of the most merciful. Allah calls them عِبَادُ الرَّحْمَنِ. He attributes their servitude to Him, but with His quality to being Ar-Rahman. Meaning someone who is connected to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and connected to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the foremost manifestation of everything that they do is that they are merciful. Right? A person who does not have mercy in their words or in their deeds, and there's any form of harshness, right? This is because of that heart not having been worked on. That heart's relationship with Allah requires fixing up, and especially that heart's relationship with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The servants of the most merciful are those who walk upon the earth with humility And he said of some of the pious that they were so humble that the earth itself would complain about their humanity, right? Walking on earth, even the way a person walks on the ground, right? Realizing that this earth is a blessing from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we know also the form represents the inner. So when we say a person walks proudfully and boastfully, what does that mean? We say a person walks with their nose in the air, right? A person is walking with their nose in the air. He might be looking at the sky, right? But a person walking with the nose in the air is a reflection of what? It's a reflection of pride in the heart. So even the way a person carries themselves is a reflection of their state of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is our hearts and minds here that those walk upon the earth with humility. When did any of us ever walk with the intention to practice upon this ayah? I'm now going to walk humbly on the earth because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has described His servants as those who walk humbly on the earth. Will there be a difference in the way we walk or not? But if we actualized that intention, meaning with dignity and tranquility. So where is the dignity and tranquility in these modern practices? And so the people of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, even we spoke about Imam al-Haddad, even in certain forms of manifestations of the deen, they would stay away from things which might not be dignified. And we said we also respect the practices of different cultures. So for example, in Africa, right, there are certain people who are very, especially one goes to Mid Africa, North Africa, right, Sudan and Senegal, etc. If one is to see the way they do ibadah, right, it's movement. They're doing dhikr and they might be doing salawat on the Prophet ﷺ, but they are moving and for that culture that is perfectly acceptable. Right? So does a person go there and disparage and speak about them? Obviously, we know what the Sharia says, and then there is leeway in the customs of times and places. And naturally, when we read the Quran, what do? When a person reads Quran, have you ever walked into a madrasa where people are doing revision door? You see all the children, what are they doing? They're sitting still, right? Like with birds on their heads. What are they doing? They're moving, right? Generally. So it's a natural thing when a person is involved in dhikr that, and that movement also is meaning that something is happening inside, which is it's a good thing, right? Because there's an internal movement. Just as someone who raises their nose in the air, it's a manifestation of pride in the heart. A person who, when they are involved in dhikr, those movements also are a manifestation of certain things happening in the heart. So protect your honor from what might tarnish it. And this is also a rule on the spiritual path. A person's character, a person's reputation. His reputation has to be protected. And this a reputation is like a crystal glass. A reputation is like a mirror. Once it is tarnished or broken, it can never, ever, ever be repaired again. And even if it does get repaired, it will never reflect a mirror that has been cracked, right? Or sullied to such an extent that the dirt has remained stuck and it removes that gloss and that polish. But more so, if it gets cracked, it will never, ever reflect light or the reflection that is put there. So the heart that things will never reflect the light of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is a heart that never ever transgressed against Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is why we have major and minor sins. Right? The goal of a children leave their home. Right? This is the yardstick of a successful parent. In today's past, obviously the children not have fallen into not just minor sins, the thought of committing even acts which are makruh. Right? And some of them in recording the blessings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala at the end of their lives, they would say, Alhamdulillah, the thought of committing a makruh act never ever crossed my mind. That's how they were trained. So a person has to protect their honor, they have to protect their reputation. Reputation, even though it has an image or it has a connection to what people think about you, right? But again, it comes back to the customs of that particular place. And a person has to respect the customs of that particular place. Preserving one's dignity is a fundamental principle in religion. Al-Ahnath ibn Qais, may Allah be pleased with him, was asked, how did you attain such nobility of character? And he replied, if my people had found fault with drinking cold water, I would not have drunk it. So know and implement, and you will succeed by the aid and will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So what is it? In the first and foremost, a person needs to know what are those things which tarnish one's reputation in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? In the eyes of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in the eyes of the people of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is first and foremost what a person has to stay away from. And with regards to, obviously, he's mentioning this particular example because the days that they lived in is the people generally were on, the people generally were on goodness. He mentioned in the book that the times are described as being good or bad times according to the majority. There are always good people around, but if the majority are evil, then we said we're living in evil times. But if the majority are good, then we said that we are living in good times. But good and evil will always be around at the same time. In today's times, even if a person does something which in the religion is haram, the society won't have a problem with it. Right? So who is the yardstick of measure? The yardstick of measure is the Quran, is the hadith of the Prophet, and it's the pious people of that particular generation. And in this regard, what does this mean? We know that a person also should not go to certain places, right? If when seen there, it could be spoken about. This is part of protecting one's dignity, one's honor. There's a famous story of Imam al-Bukhari, which is always narrated. He was traveling and he got into a ship with the inheritance he had received or money he had received from his father. And it was a very large amount of money. In today's times, they say it was almost up to tens of millions of dollars. And he was a scholar of hadith. And we know that in hadith, your hadith is not accepted if you are known to be a liar, if you have anything which has tarnished your reputation. Even one particular thing, right? If you lie just once in your life, hadith would never be accepted from you. If you disrespected your parents, hadith would never be accepted of you. In the past, if you ate in a public place, your hadith would never be accepted. Scholars never ate, and this would actually be regarded as a huge, what you call a disparagement of a person's reputation, that he was seen in a public place eating. In the past, they would even mention about walking with one's head uncovered. Obviously, the culture today and the custom is different. But in the past, the scholars would never be found with their heads uncovered. They would never be found even wearing certain types of clothing which were not according to the Sharia. Because if that was found out, then people would not take hadith from them. As Imam Bukhari mentioned that he traveled a long distance because there was a certain hadith which he needed the sanad to. And he comes to that scholar and he finds the scholar trying to coerce his donkey to come into the barn. And he's holding his hand like he had it. When he enters the barn, he realizes there's nothing there. Imam Bukhari goes back and he traveled for days and days to go to the hadith. He says if he's receiving a donkey, and this is a reflection of his heart, how can I be sure that his hadith is correct? So Imam Bukhari was on the ship and he befriends someone on the ship and he ends up mentioning to this person that he had a large amount of money and he's going to a certain place to continue his studies or continue his teaching, whatever. The next morning, while they're on the ship, this person starts shouting at the top of his voice, "My money has been stolen, my money has been stolen." He calls on the captain and the officers of the ship, "Please search the ship, someone has stolen my money." Whose money is it? It's Imam Bukhari's money. Now when they search, where are they going to find? Who are they going to find the money with? And what's going to happen to the reputation of Imam Bukhari? And so they search the ship. They don't find the money with anyone. Right? And he goes on and he's complaining, whatever they search everywhere, they start telling him like you're a madman. There's no one has taken any money. There's no money on the ship at all. You searched everywhere. He goes to Imam, he says, "What did you do?" I threw it overboard. He says, "What? You threw that over?" He says, "Did you think I was going to tarnish my reputation for about some of the dunya?" Right? And so he gave up the entire amount of money because he knew that if he was even accused falsely, and he might have been able to prove that this is not correct, but if he wasn't, that would have tarnished his reputation. This is the extent they went to protect their reputation. The author then goes on to, in all of these 28 pages that we have read in this past maybe 9 weeks or 9 lessons are all just an introduction to the spiritual path, right? But they are foundational rulings, and we are required to read them over and over and over again. And instead, it might be better for a person to spend time reading certain lines or reading certain pages over and over until it really sinks into one's heart and mind. And this would be more poignant for them or more, have a bigger effect on their heart than much ibadah which a person would do without realizing these rules, without realizing these foundational steps. And so the author says on page 29, the first thing that we should begin with is to draw attention to the etiquette of speech. Why do we need to pay attention to the etiquette of speech? It's because إن الكلام لفي الفؤاد وإنما جعل اللسان على الفؤاد دليلا. Speech lies where? Not on the tongue. Speech lies in the heart. And the tongue has only been made a reflection or a representation of what lies in the heart. So if you are sitting here, right, and you're thinking about that person that argued with you at work today, right, or the disputation you had with someone, and you are thinking, tomorrow I'm going to tell you this, I'm going to tell you that. In the estimation of the angels and the estimation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that is as much as though you have already had that disputation with that person, right? Because if anyone has a question now, they raise their hand. I'll say, okay, I'll take the question in a few minutes. After a few minutes, you now mention the question. Where was the question in the time when you raised your hand to before you actually spoke? Where was the question? It was in your heart. So speech is constantly happening. They call this hadith al-nafs, right? They call this the speech of the ego. And if someone has to spend time, and we listen from people also who spend time in khalwa. Even the Hindu Buddhists, they do this. And they do it for free. They allow you to go sit for 10 days in a silent retreat, right? Free accommodation, free food, right? And they say the only thing you have to do is remain silent for 10 days, no speaking at all. This is the form of spiritual practice that they do. And some people, when you listen to those that have spent time, they would say after the third or fourth or fifth day, you actually start hearing your thoughts. It says the silence becomes too loud and they will break down, right? Because now what's happening? Just as if you do dhikr, right? If you do dhikr in a very powerful way, and constantly, you're reading La ilaha illallah, you're taking the name of Allah, and then you slowly lower your voice, slowly, and you remain silent, what happens? It's almost this inertia of dhikr. If you feel the dhikr happening, and that's the whole purpose of dhikr. The whole purpose of dhikr is that the dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala overtakes that hadith al-nafs. And that even when we are not doing dhikr, now what's happening? The heart is still doing dhikr. But that can only happen if a person now, their dhikr is more than their speech. Right? And this is why people would sit in khalwa and they do dhikr for days and days on end. Or they would have a regular program of doing dhikr so that the heart is constantly now being nurtured. And so if a person spends time in khalwa, they will begin to hear their thoughts. Meaning there is a different speech happening inside. There's another world inside our hearts. And what comes out of the tongue is only a reflection of what is there. And so a person has to now watch their tongue. Because what happens when you watch your tongue, you inevitably, what are you doing? You're purifying your heart. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes this in the verse of the Quran, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu taqullaha wa qulu qawlan sadida. All you who believe, fear Allah and speak a word. Qulu qawlan sadida. Be straight to the point. And Allah gives the result of it. When you don't beat around the bush, you're not deceptive in your speech, you're not trying to suck up to people. You speak truthfully, right, to the point. What happens? قولوا قولا سديدا يصلح لكم أعمالكم. Allah will rectify your deeds. ويغفر لكم ذنوبكم. Allah will forgive your sins. Do we want our actions to be rectified? Do we want our sins to be forgiven? Very easy, just control your tongue. Right? Don't speak out of turn. Don't say the things which the ego wants you to say. Control yourself, right? And the secret of the speech is that what you speak about affects the heart, right? And then what you think about is then manifested on the tongue. And this is why one of the greatest causes of the rectification of one's heart is for a person to go and call people to Allah, to go do dawah. If a person even, and it's a very thin line, but for example, if a person is negligent in the recitation of Quran, go and encourage people to read Quran with the intention that I'm not talking to them. And this is how even the people of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when they would speak in public and they would have lessons, the intention is never to speak and preach to people. The intention is always to speak to their own hearts. So if you make this intention, I'm going to speak to someone today about the importance of Quran only so that my heart can hear those words. My heart can actually take heed. And this would be the resulting effect. Because a person feels shy to speak to someone about something, right? And then those buds of hypocrisy start popping up, right? And they break the heart. How can I be speaking to someone about these things and I'm not doing it myself? And that is actually a good thing, because what does it mean? That now leads the heart to want to rectify itself. Right? So calling people to something, even though we are not doing it with the intention, I'm not calling them, I'm calling myself. The problem is if a person now is involved in calling people to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, speaking about the deen, but he has no regard for bringing that himself into bringing it into action himself. And so if we correct our tongues, our hearts are corrected, and then in a loop, the tongue that gets corrected more. And then the heart gets corrected more. This is actually, and what happens then, this actually leads to that hadith nafs now going away. When we speak about the certainty, right, the belief in the unseen, how are the veils of the heart lifted up? The veils of the heart are lifted is when what a person believes in their heart, right? They have reached a level in which the unseen is almost like it has become seen. Means the person, what the only thing that comes out of their heart are the spiritual realities which their heart is actually privy to. And therefore, when you hear the people of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right, they will only speak about what's the only thing they speak about. They're speaking about Allah, speaking about the Prophet, because that's the only thing in their hearts. And we can also, with ourselves, gauge people and gauge ourselves by what's in our, by what we hear people speaking about. Sayyidina Rabi'a al-Basriya, a famous saint of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, she was walking by some, it's a famous story, it's always mentioned. She was walking by some men who were in inverted commas Sufis. They were people who were aspirants on the spiritual path, right? And they were sitting in a gathering, and the one is disparaging the dunya. The dunya is like this, and we should stay away from it. And the dunya is like that, and it's a trap of shaitan. And the next one is not disparaging the dunya. Right? And we find also people would talk about. You find maybe some people speak, about relationships. Women would say, men are like this, and men would say, women are like this. People say, the dunya is like this. Other people would say, status is like this. And we are disparaging certain things. Say, she walked by and she told them, if it didn't have a place in your hearts, you would not have even uttered anything about it, positive or negative. Meaning, even the negative things sometimes we say about certain things can be an exposure of where our hearts are. And therefore, we find that the greatest thing in the company of the pious is their silence. The words that they speak are actually very, very, very few in number. So, dear brother or sister, reader, know that those of intellect engage in actions only after thorough deliberation and sound reasoning. Meaning, think before a person does anything, think what will the effect of these deeds have on the person that I'm involved with? What will the effect of these deeds have on my surroundings? What will the effect of these deeds have on my community? What will the effect of these deeds have on my progeny? Because there's also spiritual baggage that one's children carry, just as we have generational trauma, right, of people who have been abused. Spiritually, if our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not sound, then we cause our children to inherit our bad spiritual state with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? We know this, for example, people who are cursed. Right? The Prophet is mentioned in some traditions that when Allah curses a person, that curses reaches up to 7 generations. Right? 7 generations. And sometimes maybe a particular family after generations will come and everything is going wrong in their life. And they themselves might not know what the problem is, but it's because of the spiritual baggage. And so therefore, even the pious, they would wake the wife, would wake the husband up and say, get up for tahajjud. Even if we do not want to do it for ourselves, let's do it for our children. Right? So they would even want to be good, knowing that if we are not good, that our children are going to suffer. They're not going to have a fair shot at spirituality if we don't keep our stuff in order. And so those of intellect engage in actions only after thorough deliberation and sound reasoning. None of the actions, be it acts of worship or otherwise, even of the dunya and the mundane comings and goings, none of these actions lack purpose and consideration. Purpose meaning there's an intention behind it. What intention we all come to the lesson with today, right? What intention does a person go to work with? And intentions are an ocean in itself. It's always spoken about and it needs to continuously be spoken about and reminded that every single action of theirs has purpose, even to the extent of a glass and where they would move it from this particular point to that particular point, they would be conscious of that action, right? And so when a person sees people of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, these on this very, very high level, we describe some of them, right, as they are gliders. Right? Everything they do just just flows. And it's almost like, for example, if they want to take a glass, it's almost like the glass jumps into their hand. Before they can do everything, right? They would describe when the earth, when the Prophet ﷺ would walk, they would say it was as if he was going down a slope, right? And some of the people, although say that he was going down slow, but the earth itself wanted to quicken itself for the Prophet ﷺ. So the earth folded itself for him, right? Everything became subservient to him. And so everything they do is with purpose and consideration. They do not engage in anything aimlessly or out of mere habit, right? And the greatest avenue for shaitan is idleness. Where a person just has free time, right? And one of the ways of correcting one's relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if one knows one has a weak resolve, right, and that they are not able to do things if they are on their own, it's just to occupy your day. We would find also they do this in different communities, also with non-Muslims, with the way they bring their children up, right? The school hours, they keep them busy from the morning till 3 o'clock. When they come home, then they've got to go for some extracurricular activity. They come home at night, they're extremely tired, but they still have homework to do. And their life for 4, 5, 6 years go. So they live their teenage years, but they don't necessarily do anything wrong or get up to what generally people get up to at that age. Why? It's because they are busy. And parents should likewise occupy their children in this particular regard, but with a variety of things which doesn't make them bored, but that they're busy so they don't have idle time. Right? And idle time is the worst thing for a spiritual aspirant. Imam al-Junaid would say that if a person was striving in the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for 30 years, and for one instant he became negligent, meaning he had a period of time in which he was negligent, he didn't have anything to do with purpose. Right? He would say what he loses in that instance is more than what he gained in the 30 years that passed. Right? So one gaze, and we all have this with the social media, right? If we're not careful, one day, just one video, or even if it's on the news, right? And what happens? That whole himmah is gone. Right? And so years and years and years of ibadah can be destroyed in minutes. And this is the calamity of spirituality in our times. So they do not engage in anything aimlessly or out of mere habit. A person doesn't just get up and eat because that's what they already do. What is the purpose? Do I need to eat? Am I feeling hungry? Do I need this food for the sake of my worship? Right? Will I die if I don't have my dinner tonight? Right? Because we had the dhikr and I know I still have to read my sunnahs after this lesson, but I haven't eaten. Now, will I eat? Will I have to read my sunnahs and my witr? And we know if we eat, while you're eating, you're going to pick up the phone. If you pick up the phone, then you're going to get caught up in, right? And so a person has to think about the consequences of each of the actions. And this, when we think about it, it might be daunting. But the people of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have to, and they are reflecting, and they are in this engagement with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for every single thought, every single word, every single deed, every single gaze. Even if someone comes and greets them, right? The way they greet, they would have in their minds already weighed up an entire situation of who this person is, right? How they're supposed to greet this person, with what words are they supposed to greet this person, the nature of the relationship that they have with this person. So for example, if someone comes and they greet you, but they know, okay, this particular person has something in their heart towards it, more I have something, they would then go out of the way to greet them with a more amicable tone. Whereas because someone of their students, and they know that perhaps the student was lacking in something, or they would greet them with a bit more sternness, right? So even something simple as greeting, they wouldn't let it pass without any intention. So they base their deeds on righteous intentions, especially when it comes to their words. Speech contains subtle secrets and remarkable wisdom that those of intellect understanding should be keenly aware of. Right? And so deeds based on intentions, especially with regards to words, right, have an effect. A word which a person utters with a pure intention can have an effect, right, which will continue until the day of Qiyamah. Just an actualized intention. And likewise, a word which a person utters can have an effect which will then be the cause of a person's destruction and cause him to enter the hellfire. The Prophet ﷺ himself spoke about this when he said that, when he spoke to Sayyidina, I think it was Sayyidina Mu'adh Jabal, he described the nature of the deen, right, and the affair. The head of this deen is salah, right, and it's pillars like jihad, etc., respect of parents. And then he took hold of Sayyidina Mu'adh's tongue and he said, be wary of this, control this, and guard this. Right? In the narration say he actually held Sayyidina Mu'adh's tongue. And Sayyidina Mu'adh told him, O Prophet of Allah, right? May my parents be ransomed for you. Will be taken to account of what we say? And the Prophet told him that, and the Prophet told him, means may your mother be bereaved of you. It's almost like a form of like, is there anything other than, is this anything other than the reality? And he says there is nothing that causes a person to fall headlong into the fire greater than what they have earned with their tongues. And the Prophet spoke about this. He said, a person will speak a word, not giving any regard to the word that he's spoken. But this word was so great in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that he now, because of that word, will enter into the depths of the fire. And another person will speak a word not paying any attention to that word, meaning he spoke it just in jest or without paying regard to it. But it was so appreciated in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that it becomes a means of a person's success in the hereafter. And so we have to be wary of our speech. Speech contains subtle secrets and remarkable wisdom that those of intellect and understanding should be keenly aware of. A person should exercise judgment before speaking, placing his tongue behind his heart. And this is a beautiful expression in Arabic. As you place your tongue behind your heart. What does that mean? It means just think before you actually speak. Don't. And we have to learn to actually operate with silence. You know, they say silence can sometimes be more eloquent than speech. When someone speaks to us, do we need to reply? Some people have this habit, or it is a nature that if you ask a question, just interviewees and lawyers, they will actually know this, right? And you see this, people in the media, they do this very, very well. And when they interview people, the way the question is asked, it puts a person on defense. And a person who's trained to respond they are never ever affected by the question, right? They are completely composed, no matter what the question is asked. Does Israel have a right to exist? Now you can see that response. We've all seen it, right? The question is wrong in the first place. And you can see how people who understand the secret of speech know how to respond to it, and those who, because if people have not been taught to respond with silence, meaning when a person is asked a question, someone might ask you something about your own private business, right? You don't have to twist. You can just look and smile, right? And we have this experience with sometimes people of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we go to ask a question to them, right? And it might be something that's important to you, or you think it's important, and you get invited for something, and they just look at you and smile. And a whole minute will go by. You'd feel completely, you're waiting that they actually want to say something, and they just smile. And they don't move until you actually realize, okay, you know what, maybe perhaps something wrong with the question, or it's not the appropriate time or something. You take your things and you go. But you have to be ready for that uncomfortableness. And we should try it as well, even just with our children. Sometimes the child asks the question, "I'm busy." What's the knee-jerk reaction? I'm busy. No, not now. The child answers the question, just look at them and smile. Or just look at them and remain silent. And look at the effect that silence has on them. They'll naturally read into the situation and realize, you know what? But obviously, depending if it's the first time we're doing it, then there might be a sneer comment or something. But we have to now work on so that this becomes also part of our characters, that we can also learn how to maintain silence, right? And a well-timed silence can be more eloquent than speech. So a person should exercise judgment. He should not utter anything until it has been weighed on the scales of reason. If a servant is graced with understanding this, it will be the beginning of his rectitude and culminate in success. One should speak kindly and not speak excessively, even if the words are pleasant, because too much of anything becomes distasteful. Nor should one be overly talkative or overly loud. And this is the first thing one notices about the people of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? Is that it is almost that everything they say is calculated. And Sayyidina Aisha Allah ta'ala mentioned this about the speech of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. His speech was calculated. If you wanted to count the number of words that he spoke, you'd be able to count the number of words that he spoke. Right? And obviously from the heart of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that speech was having an effect, right? And the importance of the speech of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was not just for the Sahaba, it remains until the day of until the day of Qiyamah. And then the author continues to go on to the entire chapter with regards to the tongue. Imam Ghazali in the Ihya al-Din mentions 20 diseases of the tongue. Right? How many diseases of the tongue can we actually enumerate? If we are concerned about the rectification of our hearts, just as a person, if they are concerned about their well-being. So a person who has diabetes, right, or he has some disease, but he has not yet been diagnosed with the disease, and he himself doesn't know, I'm getting tired, I'm eating, but he can't put his finger on it. Will this person ever be able to find a cure? Right? He might think he's tired because maybe he doesn't have vitamins, so he starts different types of vitamins which just exacerbate the issue. But once it's identified, diagnosed, okay, this is diabetes. Now he knows, okay, this is it. I have to stay away from sugar. I have to do this. I have to do that. Likewise, the diseases of the heart. So just the diseases of the tongue, Imam Ghazali mentions 20 diseases, right? We know, what are the diseases we know offhand? Lying, backbiting, to be two-tongued. What else? Vulgarity. What else? Someone can pull out the AI and just write what Imam Ghazali's 20 diseases of the tongue was there. Right? But again, this is how do we know if we're falling into it or not? Right? How do we know if we are even, mashallah, someone is there's nothing wrong. Obviously, it's a short if a person, sometimes they cheat to pass exams, there's nothing wrong in cheating to cure one's heart. Right? You read the book, ask AI to get give them a summary of the whole chapter on the 20 diseases of Imam Ghazali, right? 20 diseases of the tongue. Read the whole Ihya routine, ask AI to pull out a summary of the whole routine. Right? There's nothing wrong with that if it means a person is going to become aware of the situation. So if we don't know the names of the diseases, we can't recognize if we are actually falling into them. And therefore, Imam Ghazali always mentions in the Ihya, the entire Ihya from beginning to end, every spiritual disease, right? The cure to it, he says it's a combination of ilm and amal. It's a combination of knowledge and practice. Knowledge first, we have to learn what is anger, manifestations of anger, the definition of anger, right? What the Quran says about anger, how the Prophet deal with anger, how did the advice he gave, and then the stories of the pious. And then Imam Ghazali goes into even further details. And this is not just with each and every single disease has to be gone through in this particular way. And it's a life long journey. Right? A person, the purification of one's heart is not something that he's going to a hospital and come out, or attend a course and come out. It's something that we constantly need to be at it all the time. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant us tawfiq. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for us to put into practice what has been said, for us to be able to keep our tongues in check. And the nature, unfortunately, of life today, when a person, again, sometimes gatherings, they go with himmah, right? And then a day or two, if one falls into negligence, then that himmah is gone. Whereas in the past, what a person did in a week or the intended lesson would last until the entire week. And so the week after, what's happening is we're building already on a foundation. Right? But be that as it may, a person comes with, we all come with our, this is Makasir, travel to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, broken and crippled. Right? And the only hope is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when He decides, then He will lift these diseases off a person's heart. A person can make as much effort as they want, but if Allah has not desired and willed for those diseases to be lifted, then the person can never ever be free of them. وآخر دعوانا الحمد لله رب العالمين سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك وأعوذ بالشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر وإلى حضرة المرسلين محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم الفاتحة